Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And today we've seen Nosferatu.
Yes.
From 1922, F.W. Murnau's original. There have been remakes. You were telling me about the...
I went to see the Werner Herzog version with Klaus Kinski and Isabella Gianni.
In the late 70s?
In 1979, when it came out. And I was telling you that it's one of my great kind of cinephile memories, because it was an afternoon screening at Place du Canada cinema in Montreal, and there were just myself and a large lady with her shopping who was drinking a huge plastic bottle of Pepsi. And as soon as Klaus Kinski appeared with his deathly pale makeup, it was all chalky, and did the thing with his fangs, like, she just burst out laughing and she would go, ah! And that was the film ruined, because every time he'd appear, she'd continue.
Yeah.
Right? So, and actually it makes you aware of how important those moments of a transition, but of extremity, are to get right, because, if one person does that and affects the audience, then the film is lost in a way. It becomes something else. It becomes like a comedy or whereas if you see it in another context, it's a very haunting and powerful film. So anyway, there you go.
There were a few laughs amongst the audience today, but I think they were laughs of kind of recognition. We all knew what we were watching.
Yes.
So, because this is a film that was an early kind of unofficial Dracula adaptation, and they were sued over it, and the company declared bankruptcy soon after the film was made. Bram Stoker wrote Dracula. Bram Stoker's widow, Florence, sued the filmmakers for copyright infringement and won. And the film was ordered to be destroyed, but there have been surviving copies. That's how we know it today, and it's this classic of German Expressionism. And because it's kind of such a classic story in this film, it's a film that established so many tropes, kind of both storytelling-wise and visually. There are things that you just recognise implicitly, even if you haven't seen the film before, which I hadn't, for instance. So I was familiar with the general story and certain shots and the look of Nosferatu, but I'd never seen it from beginning to end. And there are points in this film where, the character who works for the estate agent, Hutter, goes to Count Orlok, who is the Count Dracula analogue, to sell him this house. And he wakes up in the morning and notices 2 spots of blood, 2 bite marks on his neck. And he thinks they were mosquito bites. He writes this in a letter to his wife, and laughs go around the audience, a ripple of laughter, because we know, obviously, it doesn't play as scary, right? The way it might have. It plays as we know what's coming, We're kind of a little bit smarter than the film, maybe we think. It was interesting to see. So we saw it at the Coffin Works, which is in Birmingham, and it's an old factory. It was working up until 1998, the Coffin Works, and it made coffin furniture. So that's things like the brass plates, crucifixes, handles, all the metal work that goes on coffins. And it was a really kind of well-regarded, high-quality business. I went and did the tour with Matt a few years ago, because it's since been kept around, and there was an effort to restore it and turn it into a museum. So we went to see the tour, and they were talking about how state funerals, Winston Churchill, Princess Diana, all of these kind of royal and state funerals, and their work had been involved in it.
Wow.
And they're hosting this outdoor screening, which you forgot was outdoor. Well, you didn't even read was outdoor, and I didn't pay attention because I never do. So I just went in a t-shirt, and that was not the brightest idea.
No, I mean, I just didn't register that it was outdoors. I thought it was going to be in a museum, So my
actual nuts froze off.
Yes.
And so did my arse.
Yes.
It wasn't the smartest idea and it wasn't an amazing screening, right? It was a DVD, as you might expect. It's not a professional, it's for Halloween and they're just trying to get people in. So it's on a small screen and playing a DVD, but it did have a live accompaniment. Which I liked.
Yes, it was a lovely event, actually. And if any of the people involved are listening, I'd like to congratulate them, really, because, it had a wonderful community feel, and they had gone all out in the decoration, and they had organized, like, the door and the toilets and all those things really, very well. the decor was fantastic. Like, people put a lot of love, I think, actually, in producing this event. That said, I do think that one goes into these events expecting a diminished sense of cinema, right? So, it's a lovely event, it's a community event, I want to support it, right? Kind of, the draw is the film and the musical accompaniment, but really, in a way, the draw needs to be the event itself and that sense of occasion that it produces. Because I really felt a loss of... The film did not have, or did not convey the power that it has.
No.
Because you're watching it in this tiny screen. I mean, it was small. It's like one of those screens that you used to use in classrooms to show slides, right? It's like a square, not very large, maybe a meter, square meter or something. So, and I think the power of Nosferatu, for me, is, those images, which I think are really, truly extraordinary. And then the way that they affect you almost physically if you see it on a large screen. If you're enveloped in that image, right? If you're enveloped in Max Schrenk's shadow, or in the shadow of Nosferatu, or... Yeah, those are kind of, I think, very powerful, haunting images that really operate on you. So that's missing here. Because actually you are larger than the screen. So...
up to a point, I mean, when those shots show up, they are still spectacular and magical. And there are these there are 5 or 6 real key shots that you've seen before, and that the images have stayed with you, of him rising up out of the coffin, of his shadow going over the door, of the long fingers grabbing the girl by the breast, the shadow. Those still work, and they did tonight,
good.
I think.
I think I've seen the film quite a few times, and so I always, I suppose, measure, the most recent experience against the others, and I did feel there was a diminished effect. So, I mean, the thing is, it's a film, it's a little bit like, some of the classic films, Casablanca. Often people feel that they've seen it because they recognize shots that they've seen on television, or images that they've seen on advertising, or scenes that they've seen in compilations, right? So it's almost like one of those films that you feel you've seen even if you haven't seen it. And I think some of these images have been famous for 100 years, so people are familiar with them, even if they haven't seen the film.
It's 100 years old next year.
It's 100 years old, and I think it's worth talking about that, because what was happening in 1918? Influenza. So the Spanish flu was going around and people were dying, and it's a little bit like now. So actually some of the film's themes,
the film uses the Black Death as a backdrop.
That's right.
Although it does sort of say that Nosferatu is responsible for it, and once he dies at the end, so does the Black Plague. And I think you probably don't quite feel the intensity of the kind of societal ruin that the Black Death brought. That's not really conveyed.
No, but, and I'm not, I mean, obviously, the film is not a document of Spanish influenza, but I'm just saying, that, like, the Spanish flu happened a year before the film was made, right? So, those questions of death, of sudden death, of ghostliness, of, they're obviously in the air, and so, what does Nosferatu bring from Middle Europe? Death. Right.
Yeah.
So I that's kind of like an interesting thing to think about, really.
And it's interesting. So the guy who provided the accompaniment also provided a short introduction to the film, and one of the things that he said that I thought was interesting was that, in comparison to Bram Stoker's Dracula, which has a real erotic kind of edge to it, what Nosferatu has is almost none of that.
I disagree.
He brings a terror, the terror of evil. He brings death with him. But he doesn't create vampires as Dracula does. He kills people. His victims die.
Yes, but I think the whole film has always been seen as very sexually potent. I mean, it's also about the dangers of sexuality, right? I remember, like, 2 of the key pieces that I read, which actually I think I must have been so dumb because there are, or maybe the pieces are so good. Anyway, they're so logical. The first was about, the omnisexuality of vampires, or at least the bisexuality of vampires, right? I remember this piece by Richard Dyer where he compared it to, oh my God, I forget that New Orleans writer who also wrote about vampires, and Lestat and so on.
Oh, and...
Yeah. She did the vampire Lestat series, and of course those books, which I loved, were also like really sexually charged, and it's all about sex and penetration
and rice.
So you get that here, right? The first person that Nosferatu has sexual intercourse with is Hottert, yeah, the man, right? And actually, so I suppose sex, if it's only seen as romantic and love and so on, then maybe you could argue that, the film is not sexual in the same way, that having a sexy Christopher Lee is or whatever. But actually there's something also about kind of, sex as brutal and scary and, and how that is itself.
There's
erotic.
A madness, I think, associated with the kind of vampirism here. I think, when he sees Hutter cuts his finger early on, and he sees the blood, and he can't keep himself from leaping at it, and that's like that doesn't come across as it comes across as so he can't control about himself.
Yes, but that's sexual.
It can be, but it's like a madness. It's like there's a tone to it that it's like a mania.
Well, I think it's also 1922, so a lot of that is sublimated, right? Like, it's there and it's there to be read, but obviously, you're penetrating through a bite on the neck, not through, fucking. I mean, the bite is the fuck. But yeah, those things kind of, stand in for each other, or certainly they can, be read that way. So I think the film is very sexually charged, but it's sexually charged like, like dark fantasies, like a sexual dream, but that goes all wrong. That is kind of unexpected or traumatic, or that is both something that you desire and something that you fear. I think the film can very much be read in that way. It has been read in that way. Is
Count Orlok fanciable?
Well, let me tell you, there's certainly a lot of, a period where you would bump into them in gay bars all over the place. Those old skinheads.
Strangely long fingers.
Aging skinheads. Definitely. So
he's got a bit of a Right Said Fred look to him.
Yeah. I think I had many interests in this film that I never really did pursue. So one of my interests was in Murnau himself as a figure, right? Because when I came out, he was one of the first people, they used to have this thing of finding a gay ancestor or something, right? And, Alexander the Great and so on. And Murnau would be one, Murnau, Eisenstein, they would be people who would be recognized, right, as being kind of pioneering, kind of homosexual artists, right? And you see this in this film, that kind of, those scenes at the beginning with Huttert,
Hutter is
the... the way that he's photographed, right? So on the one hand, the camera's quite discreet when he takes his shirt off, but he's there, and he takes his shirt off, and, and he's got those kind of lips, it's kind of quite an erotic, the husband is actually, I find, eroticized in a way that the wife isn't. So there is that kind of very interesting gay male gaze on those things in the film, I think.
I didn't know Murnau was gay.
Oh yes.
There you go.
Yes. So
things you learn on podcasts.
Yes, very much so. So, and he was very interested in Expressionism, and you could see also kind of how he himself influenced surrealists by some of the imagery in this film. I mean, there is like a history of modernity, really, that is conveyed in what is a film that is now 100 years old. One of the things that I read quickly, and I wonder what you think, is that the film has also been accused by some of drawing on anti-Semitism.
Oh, that didn't occur to me. Like in the depiction of Count Orlok, basically people saying he's got a hook nose.
Yeah.
I mean,
but not only that, though. I think the argument that I remember is, not only that physically, there is a kind of a stereotype, an anti-Semitic stereotype, but also, the association. So, for example, later on, the Nazis would associate, Jews with rats and dirt and vermin and disease, and kind of how that is in the film. Now, the other argument is that, certainly Murnau was not associated with any anti-Semitic or any stance or anything like that. So it might just have been drawing on what was in the air.
I feel like if you want to see anti-Semitism in the film, then you will then draw that connection to the rats.
Yes.
If you decide that it's there, then you go, well, there's rats too.
Yes.
But if you don't, which I didn't,
it never occurred to me.
It never occurred to me. It's the Black Death. There are rats around, right?
Yeah.
That seems like a bit of a leap.
Yes, I thought so too. I mean, because I saw the Herzog version before I saw the Murnau version, and it just never occurred to me either way, really. But then also, seeing the Dracula figure as, omnisexual has never occurred to me either. So maybe I'm just thinking that way, right? Like, because once somebody mentions it, you say, of course, duh, right? But actually, it had not.
No, sure. But the thing is, when someone clues you in that there's a sexual dimension to it, or sexual reading, you go, of course. It really is quite patently obvious. It's not the case with an anti-Semitic reading.
I didn't think so either. It had just really never occurred to me. I mean, I could see how you could now, make that connection. But, I
don't think so.
I don't think so, So,
it would be interesting maybe to see how people at the time took it. If there's some evidence to say that, or people saw this as some kind of coded message or something, well, maybe there's something in that. But I certainly don't see it.
Yes. Actually, another thing that occurs to me, again, just being older, maybe more open than I was when I was younger. Because, one of the things that I always had trouble with was the expressionism in the film, right? Mm-hmm. Because obviously, there are kind of the shadows, and it does express kind of psychological fears. So in that sense, I always understood it, But I think if you read the whole film, like people read film noir in a way, where kind of often people just go into film noir and look for shadows, and really it's all about darker desires, criminality, outsiderness, kind of those obscure areas of society that nonetheless exist and that contradict everything that you're told society should be, the unconscious, the uncontrollable, kind of I think reading it made a lot more sense to me tonight in those ways rather than if you're just ticking boxes of
Yes, there's a kind of it's tonally holistic, the film, and actually I really liked the sense, because I didn't know the plot, right? So I didn't know this whole setup of he goes off to the castle to try and sell him this house, and then as he sells him the house, Count Orlok comes to I can't remember the name of the village, but wherever it is they live, to take this house, and you know that Count Orlok has decided to buy this house because he knows the house is opposite where this guy lives, and he's seen a picture of the guy's wife, and he is attracted to the wife, wants the wife's neck, and you've seen what he can do, and I suppose kind of extra to the film, you bring some of that knowledge as well. And as this thing, he puts all the coffins on the ship, and he lies in one of them, like he's stowing himself away, and there is this feeling of encroaching pestilence. Yes. This thing that is bearing down on this town that has no knowledge of it, can't do anything about it. That's really effective. and quite creepy, actually.
Yes.
It's not a film that like out and out scares you, but it absolutely communicates. It haunts.
Actually, it's very interesting because those scenes in the ship going to England, I still vividly remember the ones in Herzog's film.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I think he extends those, or he makes them more suspenseful, but they were really creepy and terrifying, and they were in color, so it was quite dark, but then with the red, that kind of. I mean, I could be wrong about all of that, but that is just, I haven't seen the film since then.
Right.
But it's something that's really stayed with me, at least as a, even as an erroneous memory, kind of. I have that vivid sense of, that shipboard scene of. Nosferatu taking over the ship on his way.
That's a whole creepy sequence in itself. Creepy couple of sequences because of the feeling of being trapped there. It's inescapable. And then the first mate going down below deck and having no option. In the moment, I sort of think, why has he dropped the axe? Attack him. But of course, it's about the fear, and it kind of sort of does make sense. And at least, like I say, tonally, overall, it makes sense that he would drop the axe in fear and jump off the boat.
Yes.
I
mean, I think it's, to me, amazing that we're watching a film that's 100 years old, right? And, and that it's still thrilling. Yeah, like it is kind of... I mean, so obviously cinema is an art, and this is, I think, one of the great films. But it still somehow surprises me, that you're seeing it at the Coffin Works with people who aren't necessarily cinephiles, or, you got the sense that it was a general audience rather than, a specialist cinephile audience. And that these films kind of, still live and circulate, and people are culture with the images circulated and recirculated so that they kind of become part of the culture. I think it's kind of, quite a testament to the power of cinema, but also something that is past. Yeah, so like the film is a modernist work. Yeah, and you think, well, that modernism is now 100 years old. Yeah. So, anyway, just a thought.
Feeling old.
Not me. But our ways of talking about it might be old. So, I mean, I don't know more to say than that, except I've been reading this fantastic book on metamodernism, which is not about a cultural logic. So I'm also now reading a book about, metamodernism as an aesthetic, or as the cultural logic of the time that we're living in, just the way that postmodernism was 40 years ago, right? That we're now beyond that, right? But this is more like a work of philosophy, about, what is and how we know, and how we can demonstrate and so on. So, maybe we also need a new way to talk about kind of, the works that we're seeing and how they circulate and mean and move, and move you, but also kind of, maybe find another way, to talk about these films that kind of situate them both in their fullness, or however much is possible, their historical fullness, but also a different way to talk about them in relation to us now, to our culture now, which obviously is not the same, can be reproduced maybe.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm very glad we saw it, even though I was shivering throughout the evening.
In fear. Because you're a little
cold.
scaredy cat. And it's a full moon out. And there's werewolves.
If I hadn't had that Coffin chocolate bar, which was absolutely delicious, I might have died of cold.
I'm amazed I didn't die. Frankly.
You hit it very well. You were very stoic with your little t-shirt.
Because I just don't think, I knew it would be cold, and I just rush out the house and don't take a jumper or a coat, and then you think, right, well, my bed got a lie in it, and then because you're not quite aware of how far through the film you are and how long there is left. When Nosferatu sort of gets into a room, you're thinking, oh, I hope this is it. I hope there's not like, this is the first skirmish, and then they do it again later. I do hope he dies now.
Die already, I'm dying myself. It was very, very cold.
Unfortunately, he did.
Anyway, in spite of it being freezing cold, which was our own fault,
for living in England,
I thought it was wonderful, and I think if we had brought a blanket, it would have been lovely.
We could have huddled up with some mulled wine.
That's right.
Glad we didn't.
And been at the Coffin Works on Halloween, looking at Nosferatu. Lovely.
Near Halloween.
Yeah, well,
nearish.
Anyway, we highly recommend it. I mean, actually, this is a film that if you get the Blu-ray, you'll have a much better viewing experience probably in your living room, than the conditions that we saw it tonight, except for the audience. So if you haven't seen it, do. It's really fantastic.
Yeah, proper classic.
Yeah. All right, thank you very much for listening. We are Eavesdropping at the Movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Audible, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter. And the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.